Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Well, hello there, lovely radicals. It's Merritt here with another deep dive episode of the Life Unrestricted podcast. This one is for everyone who is dealing with an inner fear voice, a gremlin, an inner bully. You know what I mean? That negative commentator that pisses on your parade every chance it gets. That one. So therefore, this episode is for literally everybody. Because as much as some people just refuse to talk about it, we all have a fear voice in our head. Everyone. Even those who seem to have their shit together all the time. Because no one has their shit together all the time. Not everyone's inner gremlin is the same, of course, but the source is the same. Whether you get fearful thoughts about your parenting style, or you feel like an imposter at work, or you're hiding your insecurities behind perfectionistic tendencies in order to not get called out as a failure. Whether your gremlin tells you your body should look different or that you're a bad partner, it gets to us all, usually at our weakest spot. So let's get that myth out of the way that some people just feel swell all the time and only have kind and loving thoughts about themselves. Does not exist. Deep down, we are all carrying around some deep fear of not being enough on some level or other. And we all deal with that differently. Some people hide it behind constant busyness. Some play the savior all the time to feel worthy of existing. Some distract themselves with, affairs, gambling, shopping, working. And others are in the never-ending loop of trying to fix their body, hoping that when they do finally achieve their quote-unquote goal body, that their inner gremlin will finally shut up or be nice. But no, we all know it. No matter how much we obey it, it never shuts up. No matter what kind of jeans size we starve ourselves into, it never shuts up. No matter how ripped you get, it will not shut up. No matter how much we might restrict food, no matter how much we deny ourselves a fundamental need, no matter how compulsively we exercise, this sucker cannot be outrun, out-dieted, outworked, out-eaten, out-bargained, or out-numbed. For some people, it might be that they are compulsively nice to everybody, and still it doesn't shut up. For others, it means to always do their household perfectly, say. But no, it will never shut up. There will be a small piece of dust somewhere that it gets off on. You know what I mean? Whatever we do, we still have that fear voice in our head that goes on about how we're not enough or how we're not doing enough. So all we can do is try and deal with that. Because whatever we try to do to escape that pain of unworthiness, it will always wake up a millisecond after you in the morning, and it will not go to sleep until you are asleep. And if we're not dealing with it, everything can turn into an addiction if the purpose of it is to hide from feelings we don't want to feel. So even though we talk about that inner fear voice, mostly from the angle of disordered eating, what I'm trying to say is that it really suits any brand of gremlin, any sort of inner bully thoughts. And I say all this not only because it's important to see that we all have that voice, and that the sooner we start talking about it openly, the better, because we can only dissolve our shame by sharing what we feel ashamed for. And that you And we are not alone. But I also say it because now that we know that this voice will never completely disappear, we have to recognize that it's no use waiting to disobey it, waiting to talk back to it, waiting to deal with it until it grows less nasty. Because it only grows less nasty if we disobey it and if we talk back to it, if we start dealing with it. And that dealing with it will bring up a lot of fear in the beginning because we are not yet familiar with what will happen if we stop believing and obeying what our gremlin voices say. I don't know about you, but for me, that sucker is sure as hell convincing, with all of its hissing, sarcastic comments and catastrophic scenarios. So the first few rounds of dealing with it, of talking back, of disobeying, will feel like free falling into anxiety and uncertainty. So we can all do with a little support, right? So I'm going on and on and on about this just to say that none of us is required to master this asshat ourselves. We can't. We are here to connect, to remind each other that we are going to be okay, to hold each other's hands when it gets hard. So that's what this episode is about. I hope I'm not overselling it when I say expect your mind to be blown. But there, I already said it, and I sure hope that it will be blown a little bit. By the way, you lovely human beings, thank you for making this show possible. I wouldn't be able to do it all if you didn't support this podcast with your donations on patreon.com. I am truly grateful for that. And most of all, so are all the listeners who cannot afford to support it. So you are not only helping me keeping up my work, but you're also helping thousands who listen to this every week. Thank you. A few people have deleted their donations at the start of the year because their life situation has changed. And to them, just as big a thank you for the time you did support me. Thank you. And if some of you have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk about people becoming so-called Patreons, you better check out my site on the support page, patreon.com. You will find me there at patreon.com, patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. And if you feel like helping to keep this baby afloat, feel free to become a Patreon of this show. No strings attached. You can cancel anytime. I'd love for you to consider it. And I thank you in advance, no matter what you decide to do. Just go and have a look at patreon.com/lifeunrestricted. And right now, this is a good example of Inner Gremlin. Because when I, ask for support, guess what my Inner Gremlin tells me? It's probably what any state-of-the-art gremlin would say. It says, who the hell do you think you are? You truly think the sad little podcast thing is deserving of support? The whole chorus comes on, yep. So what do? I thank it for its input and I asked anyway, even though I felt horrible. Like, who would ask for support? That's pathetic. But no, it isn't. So that's exactly what we're going to practice today, together. Ready? All right. In today's episode of the Life Unrestricted podcast, I talk to Thom Rutledge from Nashville. Thom is a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist, author, and speaker who has experienced both sides of the therapeutic relationship as a clinician and as a client. He blends his personal recovery from depression, addiction, and excessive self-criticism with 30 years of professional experience to guide his clients, readers, and audience from self-judgment and perfectionism toward genuine self-compassion. He's the author of several books. One of them is Embracing Fear. Another is called Earning Your Own Respect. Another yet is called The Greater Possibilities. And he has also co-written Life Without Ed, meaning Life Without Eating Disorder, with Jenny Schaefer, which has become a bestseller. that some of you probably have known for a long time. Thom's trademark sense of humor, a down-to-earth practicality, and his own compassion are the common threads that run through his unique brand of psychology. And in this amazing talk, we sure as hell talk about this inner gremlin voice, which Thom, by the way, calls the inner bully. And for the sake of honoring his great work on the book Life Without Ed, we often use the term ed, eating disorder, when talking about our inner conversations. So, for example, when Ed wants to scare you into jumping headfirst into the next diet, or if Ed wants you to over-exercise again, we mean the eating disorder voice. So we disobey Ed, for example, just so that you know this abbreviation. It is much easier to personalize it, whether you call it gremlin or bully or Ed, but it actually helps to disentangle from this voice and not think that it's you who creates that thought. So I hope no one is confused when we're talking about Ed as this typical eating disorder voice. You can, of course, call it however you want to call it. Again, it doesn't matter. The point is to separate this inner doom voice from your healthy voice. So now I think we're all set up with the basics, and we can dive right into this incredibly open, vulnerable, at least for me, and frankly quite therapeutic talk Thom and I had. And I think after this episode, you'll know a lot more about me and my fears than you did before. But first things first, time for Hello, Thom. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show.
It's really great talking to you. You are a specialist in so many things, so I don't even know where to start. So I best start with you, introducing yourself to the audience. Who are you and what brought you here today?
Well, I've been doing this work for so long. I've been at this a little bit over 30 years. It's interesting when you say specialist. After a while, you realize you kind of accidentally specialize in things. Or I haven't. It's like I accidentally specialized in eating disorder work because a former client of mine wrote a book, and I contributed some to it, and it became a bestseller. Once that book was out, everybody saw me as an eating disorder expert, so I had to kind of rise to the occasion. So that was an interesting thing. Now, as a lot of the work I did early on in my life and career is addiction work. I'm in private practice, and I just work with a lot of different things, depression, anxiety. It all mixes together. It's like I'm not much on the idea of somebody's in treatment for this or for that. As corny as it may sound, it's more of a holistic approach. The idea is if you come to see me, then I'm going to work with merit. I just want to know you and what kind of problems you have. But most of the time, what we're really doing is we're sorting through and problem solving for people. So it's kind of hard to pin down, especially.
Do you find addiction or alcoholism has a lot to do with eating disorders as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's like, it felt to me like these people I was talking to who had eating disorders were just like me. This may sound strange, but they were just like me in terms of the addiction stuff. In terms of the actual addiction, the compulsion that I have to do a certain thing. For me, it's I have to drink or use drugs. For an anorexic, it's I have to restrict, or bulimic, I have to do whatever those behaviors are. Mine is simpler because all I have to do is abstain from alcohol. I say all I have to do. That wasn't easy at all on the front end, but it's very clear what I have to not do. With eating disorders, depending on what the eating disorder is, it's more complicated. For one thing, you can't just abstain from food. As a matter of fact, that's one of the diagnoses. That's what anorexia is. It would be sort of like if I had to every day, as a recovering alcoholic, find a way to drink a cup of beer and an ounce or two of tequila, but I couldn't go more than that. Eating disorder people have to face food every single day. What I need to do is stay away from alcohol and drugs. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Totally. That's what I complain about usually, like disordered eating and eating disorders. We got it so much harder. We need to deal with that stuff on a daily basis, whether we want to or not, and others can just go the abstinent route, so to say. But that fear that we're all in the grip of, and underneath eating disorders and disordered eating as well, I think lies a lot of fear that manifests as a total panic, fear of weight gain. And underneath that, there's probably a much more existential fear. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a book called Embracing Fear many years ago now. So with writing Embracing Fear, I spent a year and a half with that subject. And one of the things that I came away with is understanding, as human beings, what we fear the most is uncertainty. It scares the crap out of us. It's just like we want to know. The idea that we do not know scares us to death. And, of course, that's the nature of life. See, that's one of the weird things about the insanity of being a human is that we actually fear the nature of life, which is uncertainty. You and I are talking now. It's like we have a plan for the day. We have a plan for the week. We have a plan for our lives. We have no way of knowing how that plan is going to go. And yet, one of the things that can really freak somebody out is if they don't think they know where they're going. So I think that is part of the existential fear that you're talking about underneath there. Each person is different. That's part of what the process is trying to get underneath there and finding out what that particular person, what that specific person is afraid of.
In your work with your clients, you often ask them, how do you see yourself in relationship with fear? What do you mean when you say that?
The key word in that is relationship. What I do with my particular work, with my particular model that I just refer to as the intrapersonal process, is what I'm dealing with are the relationships inside our consciousness. And so we're going to do relationship therapy, but it's all going to happen inside of the person's mind. The first thing we have to do is do what I call moving from possession to relationship. So that basically the fear, whatever my fear is, if I'm just possessed by it, if I'm just doing nothing but feeling it and identifying with all the scary thoughts that I have, as a therapist, I can't really do anything about that because in order to do that, I would have to make something go away. I would have to make the fear go away, or I would have to make the thought go away. So if I tell you, don't think of the color blue, or don't think of your left hand, it's like your brain does not. Anybody listening to this, it's like the brain just does not encode the negative. It goes immediately to the command. Once we know that and we look at that from a point of view of recovering people and from therapists, what we're doing is we're always trying to make things go away. What I believe is that's a waste of energy. And we all do it. I do it. It's like, but what we want to do is create a problem definition that we can actually use to solve the problem. So that's where we move from possession to relationship. It's like, so now, rather than I am possessed by my fear, now I have a fear voice. But embracing fear, I use the term bully just as a generic kind of version of that. Some bully in our head that's trying to scare us. And then we identify what is being told to us. What is the scary story that's being told? What is the threat? And so to go back to uncertainty, it's like, you need to know what's going on. You're not in control of everything. You're supposed to be in control of everything. If I can see myself as the person who is hearing this rather than thinking this, it's just a little bit of a difference, but it leaves me a position. Now I have somebody to root for in the story, and I have a question I can ask myself is once the fear speaks, or once the addiction speaks, or once the eating disorder speaks, I can ask myself, what do I think? That's the separation. That's what the relationship is. So the idea is it's not going to be whether or not I have fear. It's going to be what my relationship to fear is. In other words, do I respond just by what it is telling me to do, or do I stop, listen to the message, and make my own decision?
Yeah.
People often think I'm making them crazy at first because I'm talking about the little committee in their heads where they're talking to themselves. But the more they do it, the more they realize that this is really the way we think anyway. We think in conversation. We think in terms of asking ourselves questions and answering them.
Mm-hmm, totally. And you said it, what holds most people back from stepping out of their own prison in their head is this inner voice that you call the bully. I call it the inner gremlin. And that one talks to us like a prophet of doom. I mean, everything will go wrong. Everything will be terrible, will be rejected. It's a very scary voice.
Right.
So,
and you used a great word there that I use sometimes is prophet. And we all have this prophet of doom, like you're saying, in our mind. You know, the one that makes up stories and tells us about what's going to happen. They're never good stories. They're always scary stories. And whenever that prophet speaks, we stop and we attend. We listen carefully. Right? I mean, it gets your attention and you hold on to that. You listen. Now, one of the things I try to help clients see through the years is like, you know, the prophet is always suggesting horrible things are going to happen. But if you really look at the track record of this prophet, and I ask people, how many times has the prophet been accurate? How many times has what the prophet predicted come true? And for most people, not very often. And some people will say, well, it's never true. Something bad may happen next week, but it's not going to be what that prophet told me. Which I think is interesting because what we're looking at here and talk about the insanity of humanity, hey, that rhymes, is basically we're saying we have a prophet who very seldom is right through a course of all of our years in our life. But when he or she speaks, we listen very attentively, and we decide to feel things in response to what that is saying. So part of what we want to be able to do is get in there and reject that. To be able to say, you know, oh, Tom, you realize what's going to happen. You're going to get in that interview with Merritt, and you're not going to know what to say. You're going to be confused. You're going to be right in the middle of it, and people are going to be listening, and they're going to be judging you. They're going to be thinking, by the way, that bullies in our heads, they talk really fast. And so they just keep talking, and then I freak out. As opposed to if I'm able to have a relationship with that fear where I'm able to say, easier said than done here, but I see you, I hear you, I know who you are, and you're not me. And I do not believe what you're telling me is the truth. You know, and then usually that bully will say, well, you'll see. It's one of his favorite things, like, go ahead. It's, you know, we'll just see what happens. And it's like, it's very scary because what he's implying is, oh, no, this is what's going to happen to you. But it doesn't.
yeah.
So I come out of the interview with you, and if my bully is in charge, I may be interpreting the entire thing as horrible because that's what my fear is telling me it is. But it's like, by doing that, I'm not allowing myself to actually have the true here and now present experience of just sitting here talking to you.
Yeah, and enjoying it maybe even,
Right.
which the bully doesn't want to, of course. This reminds me of this Mark Twain quote. You probably know it anyway. He says, I've lived through so many terrible things, some of which actually happened.
That's right. I love it.
So that's probably exactly what you said.
When you think about, I mean, it's a horrible energy leak. When we talk about fear, people sometimes will immediately go to, you know, terror and feeling just totally, you know, freaked out. But when I'm talking about fear, and this is one of the first things I point out in the book, is we're talking about lots of little things more than the big things, like worry. People who say they fret, they're constantly worrying, they're upset, their anxiety, that kind of stuff. These are versions of fear. They're smaller, lower levels of fear, but they're a little bit like if I took a screwdriver and punched holes in my gas tank in my car and then wondered why I was getting bad gas mileage. That's what these things are. The worrying and the fretting and the anxiety, they're leaks to our energy. By the way, I come from a long line of people who do this because we can turn anything into a negative. So I grew up with that. I became an expert at interpreting everything for the negative. I learned that very specifically from my family, most particularly from my mother, who was, you know, bless her heart, she was freaked out her whole life and scared to death, and didn't make her a very easy person to be around. But a big part of my recovery has been to learn how to recover from that kind of negative thinking. And that kind of negative thinking comes from believing that prophet. Believing that bad things are always going to happen. You know, and they're not.
It's like the reality is never as bad as we made it out to be in our heads beforehand. That's what I learned in so many of the workshops I've done and people I've studied with. And I have to be honest, I mean, for 40 years, I totally innocently believed all of my thoughts. And I never even thought about questioning the thoughts. I mean, they were happening in my own head. So I took everything they said or the thoughts, they were just the truth. I mean, I found myself not really having a choice in my choices. I just did what my thoughts told me I have to do. So it really took me a very long time to...
I mean, nowadays you talk in terms of your relationship to your thoughts, but even then you didn't. It's like, this is what I call the myth of singularity. And that we believe we're supposed to have one way of looking at something, one feeling, one thought about something. And whenever we have more than one thought or more than one feeling about something, then we feel crazy. We feel confused, all this other stuff. So what I'm basically doing is teaching people, not only are you not your thoughts, but, there's a lot more going on, between your ears in there than just simply having a thought and doing something about it. We all have multiple thoughts, and we're going to have multiple opinions. So the idea, like a mentor of mine used to say, the answer to either or questions is yes. So if I'm trying to figure out, do I feel guilty about this or do I feel angry about this? That's one of the great either ors that people get into. But the truth is, if I'm asking those questions, I feel both. So part of the problem definition change is we're going to ask a better question. In what way do I feel guilty about this? And in what way do I feel angry about this? And then the exploration begins. But I have to get out of that idea of singularity. See, that's what you're describing is you just assumed whatever you thought was who you were. That you didn't even think of yourself in relation to thoughts. You just, the assumption and that we have in our culture is that I am my thoughts. So if I have this thought, then that's what I think. If I have this feeling, that's what I feel. What gets confusing is when we have more than one thought, more than one opinion about something, and which is often the case, more than one feeling about something. So the idea is what we're doing is we're now changing to where we're just exploring, and what sounds like what you've been involved in the last many years now is exploring what's going on there, not with the idea of I'm going to come up with the ultimate answer. But I just want to become more familiar with how all of this works inside of me. And most importantly, what I take people to, I want to teach people how to be the decision maker in their own life. And that's the person who listens to all that's going on up there and makes the decisions about what to do.
Mm-hmm. So you probably have to go into a lot of detail with a client, say if a person who is trying to recover from an eating disorder or a lifetime of dieting or whatever, trying to keep the weight down or over-exercising, they're going to come up with pretty plausible scenarios that, I was bullied as a kid. I don't want to get bullied again. It was traumatic. So I have to keep my weight in check. And since I cannot control my eating, I have to restrict or I have to over-exercise. So what those people say sounds very credible. So how do you dissect this whole thing so that you can get to the truth of the matter and help the person find out what she or he really wants?
Right. First of all, what you said actually is from a position of being more insightful, because a lot of people don't make the connection between having that bully of the eating disorder, or just the bully that tells somebody they're never good enough, to make the connection to their past, to be able, like you said, if somebody were bullied, as a young person, or if they had an intimidating parent or whatever it was, just to make that connection, to begin to help people see that there is a perfectly good reason that you're doing this to yourself. There's a perfectly good reason you have this bully going on in your head. We can explain it by looking back at your past. And I always want people to know it's not about blame, because people get very confused about this. They don't want to blame anybody, which is a good thing. They don't want to blame their parents. They feel disloyal if they talk about that. So I always want to point out to people, we're looking back at your family. We're not going to make an excuse for you. We're not going to blame anybody. What we're doing is we're looking for explanation. What we want to know is, how did you come to be this way? Because a lot of times when people have this stuff going on, by the time they show up for therapy, they think they're crazy. But every one of us makes sense. If you tell me something about yourself and I tell you something about myself, if we track it back into our lives, the cause and effect, just straight ahead, there is a perfectly good understanding and explanation about how you became who you are and how I became who I am. So the more we understand about that, the more ability we have to make changes in that. Because like what you were saying is, we just grow up without even questioning it. We just think what I think is who I am. As opposed to, I have a sign on my wall here that says, always reserve the right to disagree with yourself.
Perfect. Yeah, I like that.
Because we need to do that every day, or at least question ourselves. I don't want to automatically, assume that my first thought is the best thought. Therein lies the potential for freedom. Now you have choice.
But it ripples out in a way that someone could say, okay, you'd have to also talk back to the diet culture that is out there.
Oh, yeah.
Because it is there, and it keeps keeping at us with the message to be skinnier and be more ripped and more this and more young and less wrinkles and blah. And speaking up against that inside of you is so hard, because therein lies the whole fear of being rejected, not being accepted anymore, being pointed at, and everything. So it's not only with eating disorders and the fear of weight gain, it's not just the inside bully, it's also the outside bully that is extremely rampant and persistent.
Right, and it's absolutely true. And I think any of us who are in this business and anybody who's in the process of recovery from this stuff, I mean, the more advocacy we can establish, the more activists we have to come out, and there's so much more of that going on nowadays than there used to be, but it's still there. Now, as a therapist working with somebody, though, what my job is to do is to help that person distinguish between the external bully and the internal bully. That the external bully is a pain. It's a real pain to work with, but it's like it does not create your problems. We have to change from the inside out. The outside, as you suggest, if I'm depending upon the culture around us to change significantly so that I'm not getting those messages anymore, I can forget it. I can hang it up, because whether that be about physical appearance or how I'm supposed to be, or anything about that. But the idea is we have to recognize that, we have to be responsible, and we have to be compassionate. That's very difficult. But we also have to say, I can't use that as an excuse for me not to recover. It's just what the outside bullies that you're surrounded with, what it does is it makes it harder. But each one of us has to face the fact that it's still our responsibility to recover inside the context of that. Because the context is not going to change. It's changing, but it's not going to change drastically in the coming couple of years. If I want to recover, I have to do it in spite of all of that.
Mm-hmm. I think I have a good quote from one of your own books for that. And it says, a threat translates into fear. Start with any difficult emotion you choose. Get on the elevator, press B for basement, and there, below the guilt and the shame and the anger, below the negativity and judgment, you will find it, fear. And then you go on to say that as much as fear seems to be part of the problem, or even that fear is the problem, it is the opposite. That when we pay attention, fear is usually part of the solution. So please explain that a little further.
Well, I think the subtitle of that book is How to Turn What Scares Us into Our Greatest Gift, is that if we're running from that fear, we can't learn from the fear. We're transforming ourselves by choosing to respond differently to the fears. In order to do that, we have to face them. It is very counterintuitive, because somebody comes into therapy and we're going to say, okay, well, what scares you? It's like, I think along the lines of what you're describing, I use a technique in there called going down the ladder. Like, so if I'm talking to you and when I say, what are you afraid of? And you're saying, I'm afraid I don't measure up to how I look. And I'll say, okay, rather than just reassure you, no, you look fine. We say, okay, if you don't look the way you're supposed to look, what happens next? Well, then I'm inadequate, Okay, well, if you're inadequate, what does that mean? And it's amazing how just a few rungs down that ladder, we get to that, what you talked about, the existential part. The idea is amazing how fast we get to the place where I feel like I am aimless, I don't have purpose, I don't have meaning, I don't know if I deserve to be here. Those fears, the threats in there, they're not right. I mean, we're being lied to by this bully, but we have to go in there and we have to listen for it. We have to discover what is specifically being said to us so that we can learn to disagree with it and to disobey. Otherwise we're always going to be running.
So in this specific example, we'd have to say, okay, so if I'm optically not adequate, or if I gain weight and I'm not, according to society's beauty ideal, looking from the outside, then something bad will happen, as in I will not have a relationship, I will not get the job I want, and I will end a lonely old spinster with 15 cats. And
well, first of all,
just
some
scenario.
Okay, let's just try a little bit of a role play. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, so let's start there. I love your term, optically inadequate. I love Yeah, well, we just call that looking like crap.
Yep. Okay. Let's call it for what it is.
Okay, so we're going to be in this role play where you can just do whatever you want to, where you're my client and I'm your therapist, and we're meeting for the first time, okay?
Good.
So what are you telling me about what your fear is about how you look?
I think if I eat what I want to, I'm going to blow up, and then, you know how it is today, so no one will look at me anymore and desire me.
Okay, so are you telling me that your fear is that when you say blow up, are you saying your fear is gaining weight?
Yeah, I could eat all day, so I have to really control myself.
Okay, and you have trouble controlling yourself with that?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go back to that in part of the work we're going to do. But today what I want to do is I want us to look at that fear. It's like, if you don't look the way you're supposed to look, what happens in your life? How does that affect your life?
It reminds me of being the only one on the, on the playground at school, and no one wanted to have me on their gym team, and no one wanted to play with me, or loneliness comes to mind.
Wow. Okay, so take a look at that. That's very powerful. That's just one step down. Now what we've done is we've changed. I feel like I need to look in a way that other people can approve of. The idea, no wonder you're so afraid of it, because you directly connect that to isolation and loneliness and basically rejection.
Mm-hmm. Ridicule and rejection. Your belief
is if you don't look the way you're supposed to look, which I think is defined by not how other people think you're supposed to look, but how you think other people are thinking that you're supposed to look. If you don't do that, then you're going to be rejected and isolated and alone and judged, right?
Mm-hmm. And ridiculed.
Now think about that. One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to establish some self-compassion for you. Imagine if you and I are sitting there talking to someone who just said that. It's not you. Let's assume somebody said, I am afraid of being rejected, alone, isolated, and ridiculed. What's the first thing you're going to say to that person?
Come here, I'm going to give you a hug. I feel the same way.
Exactly. And how often do you do that with yourself when you're feeling this way?
Never.
Zero. That's right. Yeah. I mean, so part of the thing is, and that's not a judgment either, but part of what I want to establish as we start to work with this is what a double standard we live out of. So because the idea is, you tell me if this is true, when you're afraid, I'm going to blow up, what you call blow up. But by the way, notice this big bad bully in your head doesn't use minimal terms. He doesn't say I'm gaining some weight. He says blow up. Mm-hmm. I mean, think how powerful that phrase is, blow up. It's like, double meaning. First of all, I'm going to get gigantic, but the other thing is I'm just going to explode.
Yeah.
You're thinking that's a very scary thing all by itself. Mm-hmm. Now, what I want to do is get us to the place, and I'm rushing. I'm doing a lot of things here that if I were working with an actual client, I would go slower with. But the idea is, I have immediate compassion for you when I hear that what you're telling me you're afraid of is not weight gain, but rejection and loneliness and ridicule. You were very specific in adding the ridicule part. I think that's a big, big part of the fear, right?
It is.
Yeah. Say a little bit more about that.
What comes to mind is the fact that I was being bullied as a fatter kid a lot, and I was alone, and I had a very, very traumatic home environment. Mm-hmm. And once I got out of all that, i.e. everybody died and I grew up, it was that I lost a lot of weight and I went into a pretty popular job as a radio DJ and got nationally known. Mm-hmm. And then everybody was like wanting to be around me, and I had the liberty to choose. Okay, you were not friendly before. I think I don't want to be friends with you now just because I am somebody, quote unquote. And everybody wanted to know how I lost that weight and that I looked so good. It's like the ugly duckling that turned into a white swan or something. So everybody was like, wow, now you've become something, and you were an ugly duckling before. And wow, what a wonder. I wouldn't have thought that you were able to do that and this. And so the ridicule is probably it's the fear of losing all that, as if there were somebody on the side of all this, saying, see, Merritt lost it. I knew it was a matter of time before she just let herself go and end up like she once was. So the whole disguise blows up. You know what I mean?
Right.
I get like seen through. Somebody would be there and say, I knew you when you were small, and I knew you couldn't keep that disguise shit up.
Right.
And I'd have to say, fuck yes.
Right. We call it the imposter syndrome, that we just live with fear that somebody's going to discover who we really are. I just want to point out in language, it's interesting when you said that your fear of losing all that you had gained, that you again used the term blow up. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's actually very violent.
Yeah, and that's what my therapist always says. It's like you are like a Nazi guard in your own head, and it's wartime all the time.
Right, exactly.
And she was right about it. And I also told her, I'm only a fake skinny person.
Right.
I'm trying really hard to be skinny. So in fact, I'm not. I'm only faking this.
Right.
And she was looking at me totally puzzled. Like, what is a fake skinny person anyway?
It's like, but of course, we can stand in a room full of people with eating disorders, and you can say I'm a fake skinny person, and everybody in that room would know exactly what you're talking about.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Even people always go like, my therapist doesn't know all about eating disorders. I go like, well, teach them. That's how I learned. It's like therapy, and good therapy is a collaboration anyway. So if you're saying all those things and somebody's looking at you and you look attractive and you're skinny and all this other stuff, they're going like, well, no, with the best intention to reassure, we basically minimize and criticize. What we're saying to you, tell me all these things you're afraid of because of how you might look. And I say, well, no, don't worry about that, Mary. You look good, so don't worry about it. It's like, well, that's not helpful. That's me saying to you, it is a criticism, well-meaning though it is, that you're afraid of something you shouldn't be afraid of. It's also me saying what you feel about all that stuff is not that important.
Mm-hmm. You're not acknowledging that I'm actually afraid to lose that. Right. And by you reinforcing that it's okay now, you're only reinforcing my fear that it's not going to be okay when it changes.
Right. Yeah, because, that bully voice says, yeah, that person thinks that now, but just wait. Mm-hmm. Exactly. They'll see. I want to go in a little bit of a different direction than some people would go just to make this point. Let's go back to the thing where you and I are talking to another person. Okay? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, see, this is one of the things, I think it's a great example because I think it's one of the things that a lot of people, I think even a lot of therapists miss an opportunity here. Wow, there's just so much here. It's like, you're very good at this. So you and I are talking to somebody, and I listened to her voice. And when she started talking about how things went right, when she lost the weight and she became, it's not you now, you and I are the co-therapist, okay? It's like she talked about losing the weight. She talked about becoming well-known and respected and all this other stuff. Her voice got so enthusiastic. A lot of powerful, positive energy. Basically, she had been rescued from ridicule.
Exactly.
She'd been rescued. She was out of it.
She felt safe, finally.
And the relief of this is like she had lived all this time in this place where she was, but nobody even knew she was there. So all of a sudden, she's lifted out of this. So what's the greatest fear that we have to work with her? She's afraid. It's not so much looking backwards. It's about looking forward. She has all this stuff. And now the bully says to her, one wrong move and you lose all of this.
That's what it says. It's like the light at the end of the tunnel is the lamp of an oncoming train.
Yes, that's exactly right. Mm-hmm. It's like, see, this is how clever these bullies are. They're smarter than we are. That's why we need each other to talk about this stuff. Because what the bully's done is taken your very most positive experience of basically being rescued from the crap of your childhood, the loneliness, the ridicule, now that's a very fragile state that could crumble at any time because she's being told it's not real. You're sitting there, and if you've lost the weight, your eating disorder is saying to you, you haven't really lost the weight.
Yeah, it's only by you listening to me that I can keep this up for you.
Right, exactly. That's one of the things that eating disorder will say is, we use the acronym ED to do the eating disorders to kind of personify him. I'll tell clients that toward the end of a session, now Ed is going to be waiting in your car when you leave here, and he's going to try to undo everything we've done. He's going to tell you what a ridiculous thing, I am. He's going to say stuff like, oh, yeah, why don't you go into your therapy and do that little stuff where you sit there and talk to the empty chair and make up the voices and all that stuff. Ridicule is a good word. He just makes fun of it all, But he makes fun of it all until it starts to work. Yeah. And this is where we enlist the metaphor of a domestic violent relationship, because everything's fine until he realizes he's losing ground. You're listening to somebody other than him. It's like he gets mad. And he will attack. I mean, it's like that's one of the things I tell clients a lot of times, too. It's like, I want you to understand this is going to get worse before it gets better. You talked about the tunnel. I have a metaphor or image that I use for that, because very often when somebody's involved in this stuff, you're going to look ahead in the tunnel and you're not going to see the light. And so, obviously, it's easy to make the mistake of thinking there is no light. So if that person has developed some trust in me, what I'm going to give them the image of is, imagine a tunnel that's long. You're at one end. I'm ahead of you, and I'm at a place where the tunnel makes a 90-degree turn. It makes a right turn. It's like I can look out the rest of the tunnel. You can't. All you can see is pitch black. What I'm doing is I'm telling you I can see the light at the end of your tunnel. So keep walking toward my voice. You keep coming towards me. Once you get here, you're going to be able to see the light, because I can see it right now. And so I'll say this very strange, but very often I'm going to see the light at the end of your tunnel before you can. And it's a very sacred place to be, actually. Is when you get to a place, when I get to a place where somebody trusts me that much, as you can imagine, it's like it looks like it's nothing, and you're agreeing to come toward my voice, And it's like you're going to be thinking maybe this isn't the case, and the bullies are going to be going like, this is stupid, you shouldn't trust anybody but me. But you just keep walking one step at a time. You keep moving toward me, because I keep telling you, I can see the light. One of the things that people miss a lot of times, and even as a therapist, is, like I said, the sacredness of that. It's like the level of trust that it takes for somebody to trust my voice at the end of that tunnel. It's like, because how long have you been listening to and trusting the bully voices in your head? Forever. Mm-hmm. It's like there was a time when you didn't have them because you weren't born with them. You didn't come with those. You didn't arrive on earth with those things. But talk about the difficulty of getting out of that. There's so much a part of who you are that to let go of these things, even though they're negative, is actually, and this is where we have to have real compassion for this woman you and I are talking to. We're asking her to let go of her very identity. Mm-hmm. The biggest challenge is to say to her, the stuff that you've been told all your life, that you've believed all your life, it's not true. It was never true that how you looked was going to determine who you are. Now again, we'll give lots of respect to the outside world and what all that's going on, and we'll certainly say to a child that we understand that you didn't have any control over any of that. But ultimately, what we're not teaching in this therapy is the idea is, no, you really are, in fact, you really are skinny and you really are good looking, and therefore everything's okay. Because the whole point is, it's like, no, that's not what okay is made of. Okay is made of from the inside out. It's like the control Ed has of you is that he says, if you start gaining weight, then I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm going to have control of you again. He has control of you all the time because he's threatening you all the time.
Mm-hmm. And he also disguises as the voice of reason as well. He is a bully, and a bully doesn't identify as a bully. And my inner gremlin often pretends to only have my best interest at heart, and that I have to believe what he says in order to, as I said, avoid rejection and humiliation in life.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's very important, because that's where these guys they're always evolving, and they're smarter than we are. My guess from what you're saying is long ago, your gremlin figured out that he had to disguise himself, because once you understood who the gremlin was, that's the easier thing to do, is to tell him to go to hell. But it's like, now he comes in, slips his arm around you and says, honey, I can help.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
I mean, he'll say whatever it takes. Like, if I'm your gremlin, I'm going to go like, of course it's ridiculous that the world judges you by your weight. That should not be. You should be able to be whoever you are. But that's not the way it is, Merritt. It's like, the way it is you have to do this. We have to play the game. We have to look this way. And I'm here to protect you. I'm here to tell you and remind you of how you have to stay inside these bounds in order to continue to hold on to your good feelings and to your success.
And I wouldn't have a comeback for that.
Right,
I wouldn't have a comeback for that.
No, because he's that good. One of the most bizarre things about this to me that I've noticed through the years is your eating disorder, my alcoholism, or our bullies that tell us we're not good enough. They're, expert con artists, and that basically they're so good, they can, even when we're making lots of progress, they can bring us back. One of the things your gremlin might say is like, look, all these other people they're well-meaning. I mean, your therapist is trying to help you. Hell, even that guest on your show, Thom, is talking about that stuff. But you and I know the truth about you. I mean, these people don't know who you really are. It's like, I've been with you always. I'm the most reliable, really, person in your life. I'm always here for you. Always have been, always will be.
I saved you once.
Yeah. Part of what we're thinking when we get into recovery is, boy, it would be really nice if I could fire you, but we can't.
No.
So what we're going to do, go back to that possession to the relationship. The thing is, people get really discouraged when we say, we're not going to get rid of him. We can't get rid of him. I have no idea how to get rid of him. I don't have no idea how to get rid of my alcoholism. But I've lived free of that alcoholism for 30 years because I've learned first to disagree. No, first I learned to disobey even though I agreed. Then I learned to disagree and disobey. And, basically what happens is, over time, by not responding over and over and over again, it's really basically the way we teach people to deal with stalkers, which I always think this is a fun term for eating disorder people. We're going to starve Ed out. What we're going to do ultimately is once we understand who he is, once you can see all his disguises, then what we're going to do is we're going to begin a process of ignoring him. And it's going to be really hard because he's going to get your attention back over and over again. But we're going to go back, and every time we're going to ignore him because you don't have to be rid of Ed in order to be recovered. But what you do have to do is you have to take him out of his position of authority. That basically we want to get you to a place at one point where Ed can say whatever he wants to say. You glance over to him and say, thank you for sharing. And then you go on about your life. If something shows up and my alcoholism says, we might as well drink, I go like, you've always thought that. I understand what you think, and I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. And these guys, they're opportunists. They'll wait for us. They're looking for any opportunity, and they don't care about us. That's one of the things I want to teach people. They don't care about you. It's people who have children, I tell them, your eating disorder doesn't care about your children. Your alcoholism doesn't care about your children. They don't care about your friends. They don't care about people you love. They just want to control you. And I have no idea why that is, but it's bizarre and fascinating to me that these are basically sociopaths that live inside our head.
That's what I wanted to say. It's really bizarre. And everybody I talk to says they have some voice like that inside their head. And it's like, why was this program installed?
And to me, it's fascinating. It's like, we're talking about people that are, good people. People who have excellent, wonderful value systems, people that we respect, that we love. But if you look inside, each of us has this sociopath in our head. That's one of the ways I would demonstrate to you is, Merritt, that cannot be you because it's working off of a value system that is entirely different from yours. One of the assignments I'll give people early on sometimes is make a list of the things that you value, the things in your life, the things that are important, people that you care about, and then go over here in another column, make a list of what's important to Ed. It's like, people come back with some interesting stare there. One of the things for sure is Ed's list is shorter. Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Much shorter. And it basically, it isn't even for you to be skinny. It isn't even for somebody to do this or that. The ultimate thing in his value system is I am going to control you.
Mm-hmm. By pretending to save you.
Yeah. So really what we do is when we throw that curtain back and go like, who is this guy? He just wants to control you. That's all he wants.
And does that go for everybody? Not just people with eating disorder, but also those who have been dieting all their life and just for fear of being not an ideal weight? Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yes, it does go for everybody. Whatever the story is, I want people to understand it's different for everybody. But what we're doing is we're hitting the broad strokes and going like, yes, what we're doing is the things in our minds that are not us are trying to control us. And for people like you and me, they've been very successful for a long time. They're good at what they do. They have controlled us. And I always say I don't want to live in paranoid fear of my addiction, but I never want to be without appropriate caution.
Yeah, it's like my own mind is a dangerous neighborhood to hang out in
You don't want
alone.
to go by yourself.
Yeah. I
I
don't know
love.
whose quote it was, but it's great.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I love that
Oh,
too.
yeah.
And that's one of the biggest points to make out of all of this stuff is, I mean, just like a domestic violent relationship, you look at these bullies in your head. One of the things that they depend on to control you is to isolate you.
Yes.
It's like, don't tell anybody what we're talking about here because they're just going to think you're crazy, or don't tell anybody that you're worried about this, Merritt, because then they're going to know that that's not really who you are. Mm-hmm. We can't tell anybody, and so the idea is none of us can do this alone. What we're told is that you should be strong enough to do it alone. Mm-hmm. But what takes the most strength and the most courage for somebody who's stuck in these places is to reach out and ask for help and to let somebody in. It's like that takes much more guts than to stay isolated.
It's a critical step.
Absolutely. It's not going to happen if you don't do it. No one of us. It's not like so-and-so stronger than so-and-so. It's like, no, not one of us can do this alone. There are a lot of things I don't understand about the universe, but I'm pretty sure that's an absolute, from my perception, it's absolutely true. Yeah. We need each other. Yes. And it's like, I heard in an AA meeting one time, somebody said, well, humans are forgetting machines. We forget things. It's like, and if you think about it, that's the truth. If you think about anything you've ever read, self-help, if you go to therapy, it's like nobody's telling you anything new. I mean, what happens is we forget and we have to be reminded. And that's, to me, what support is about. That's why we have people in our lives who love us and who understand, because I can teach you something right here today, and I can say that, and within 48 hours, I can need somebody to remind me of the very same thing. So that somebody says something to me, and I go, well, oh, man, I was just talking to Merritt about that the other day. It's like, here's my theory about how the universe works. I think we are forgetting machines for a reason. And to whatever degree that there's somebody up there, planning this stuff, we are made to be forgetful so that we will need each other. If we weren't forgetful, we would all be isolated. We need to be reminded. I mean, think about it. We see this in our world. When catastrophe strikes, we watch these terrorist attacks. When catastrophe strikes, the first thing that happens, people lean on each other. People reach to each other. Mm-hmm. And what we see, unfortunately, sad to say about the human condition, is, in our culture, it's like it doesn't last long. Then people drop back into this fear place where they're scared of everybody.
Yes.
But the first thing, our actual instinct in the midst of crisis is to reach toward each other. This is where we get into something bigger, more philosophical, more sociological, is for me, all of this is about how can we get to a place as a human race, as people, where we can get into that space and stay there instead of feel great, connected, and then drop back into fear. Mm-hmm. And by the way, when you talk about the external world, we can go into, and all this stuff applies, we can take it all the way up to politics, is fear is a great motivator. We know that because we've been inner-terrorized all our lives. So what happens is there are bullies in the world, and what they do is they understand the power of fear, And so when things get out of control and people are afraid, rather than come toward them and say, we're going to be okay together. See, what you and I would say, if we gathered a bunch of people and say, look, this is crazy, we're out, there's a lot of stuff we can't control right here, but together we're going to be okay. What the bullies say is they come in and they say, I am the way, the light, and and I'm the one who's going to save you. So everybody do what I say, everybody follow me, and everything's going to be okay. And what they do is they use that to take advantage of people's fear so that people feel a false sense of security because, somebody's saying, I'm going to protect you.
Mm-hmm. And they judge the other. Whatever. Right. If Ed says, like, fat is bad or food is dangerous, or some politician says that these people are bad or those people are criminals and we need to lock ourselves up against those people, it's always me versus other instead of we.
Absolutely. This is a cool conversation that goes way beyond even what we're talking about. The idea that, and I'm no expert in this, but it's like if you talk to somebody who understands how the brain works, what that person is doing is just speaking directly to the most primitive part of our brain. Mm-hmm. There's a book called New World, New Mind by Paul Ehrlich and Robert Ornstein. And one of the points they make, and I can't remember if I'm getting my years right here, but basically the thought is our human brain has not really evolved significantly in 10,000 years. But look in that 10,000 years how different the world has become. So our brain is still responding to the world the same way. So, and the example they give is in the years and decades and centuries past, when the bear comes to your door, you freak out, which you're supposed to, and you run out the back. You run away, or you aggress. You go and kill the bear. It's like what they're saying with media, and this happened more and more with social media, is the media brings the bear to the door.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, the thing, people are so afraid in this country they're going to get killed by a terrorist. Mm-hmm. Any statistics you look at shows that they're much more likely to get killed by lightning. Certainly much more likely to be killed by something toxic in the environment. But we ignore all of that because the media is just going to talk about the terrorist because they're going to let the people who want to scare us have the most airtime. Basically, I guess what I'm saying is as a population, as a race, our job is to be doing the same thing with our world that we're trying to do with ourselves in our own minds. As grandiose as that sounds, I do think it's the same.
Move from fear towards love, probably.
Right, and risk. See, I think that's the other thing too, because you're right, to move from fear to love, because that's what that place about the best parts of us respond. Matter of fact, I hadn't thought about this until just now, so I'm going to write it down. This might be a new nutshell here. It's like, there's where they all come from.
Let's write a book together.
Oh, that's it, exactly. To get to fear to love, you have to be, this is the hard part, but you have to risk a lot.
That's the whole, that's
the thing. It's like you risk it because there's no guarantee. If I say, come toward my voice in the dark tunnel, you may trust me and you may be coming to that voice, but there is really no guarantee that I'm telling you the truth.
If it's not an oncoming train.
That's right. It's like good news there with my image that the train will hit me first. So that's
ouch.
Then you just run the other direction, Merritt.
Yeah. All right, I get it. So we have to step into the fear first to reach love.
And to listen to the fear, and we decide we call its bluff. Because if you
it's
do
not
this,
the saber-toothed tiger, as it makes out to be.
Right. It's not. I mean, one of the first things I do in the fear book is say, number one, fear is a very important thing for us. It's like, and so big part of our beginning, if we're going to explore fear, we have to learn how to distinguish healthy fear from neurotic fear. Because healthy fear is, we have to have it. It's like, and I'm not talking about just for physical danger, but in terms of relationships and things like that. We need to be, we need to be able to listen to the fear. The healthy fear in the book, as opposed to the bully, we call it the ally, the voice of really the compassionate voice of fear that says, Merritt, this is dangerous for you. You need to not do this. You need to have a boundary.
Don't cross the street when in rush hour without looking left or right.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's what the inner gremlin disguises as. I'm only trying to keep you safe, but you do what you want.
This is one of my favorite things in doing the therapy. Notice that when you do the gremlin's voice, we don't even think about this. You actually have a character in mind. He has a different voice. He speaks higher than you. Yeah. And it's almost more melodic. It's like, I'm only trying to help. It's like, it's really easy to trust me because this is the way I'm talking to you. Yeah. And it's like, okay, we're not
totally
careful.
Sarcastic. He gets like that too. Yeah. So, you go ahead. Just go. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, I can't wait to see you run into the brick wall. Go ahead. Go right ahead.
That's beautiful. That's powerful because the idea is, think about how to put doubt in somebody. If you decide you're brave, and I've been controlling you for so long, we're in this room, and I say you can't step out of this room because you'll die if you step out of the room, and you finally get to the place where you're brave enough to try it, and you say, this sucks enough to where I'm going to do something, and your hand touches that doorknob, and I just go ahead.
Yep, exactly.
Just that. It's like everything sinks in you. You go just activates this whole program that says you're going to be sorry.
Exactly. That's what mine is, an expert in that.
Absolutely. It's like in that scenario, there is nobody who's going to be able to tell you absolutely when you open that door, it's going to be okay. See, that's the thing I think we try.
That's the risk, you said.
Yeah, we try with good intentions. We try to say that, but it's like that doesn't have credibility. People who are always reassuring people, even therapists who are always reassuring people, it's going to be okay. It's like, I tell people that too, but I say it's going to be okay because we're not going to stop until we find the solutions for you. That doesn't mean going through that one door is going to, I don't know what that's going to be. I can tell you what I think will happen next. But what I can also tell you is if it doesn't happen, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here and we'll figure out the next step. But you have to take the risk of opening that door.
Mm-hmm. And the pain of not opening any door is becoming greater and greater than trying to open one door at a time and just trying something.
Beautifully said. It really is. The pain gets greater. What are you more afraid of? Staying here or taking that chance?
Because there's no oxygen anymore after a while in this room, or it gets really, really tight after a while.
I love that. That's a beautiful way to say it.
Yeah, but the problem is that, and I think that's what most people struggle with on their journey called recovery from whatever it may be, is that the progress often feels shitty. And what I'm trying to say is that this fear voice never really lets us be happy or proud of the steps that we're taking. So for me, like in my current recovery from disordered eating and exercise addiction, recovery means eating more regularly, eating more, facing more fear foods, resting more, and generally probably gaining even more weight in order to regain my menstrual cycle. So let's take a good recovery day. I rest, I eat, repeat. I eat, I rest, I eat, I rest, and I eat all day and I rest all day. That will be awesome success. You would say that as a therapist. You would say, wow, awesome, you did a good job today, considering the temper tantrum my fear voice is throwing on these days, considering the anxiety and fear that comes up. So one would think that I'm extremely proud of withstanding those difficult emotions, but no, I feel awful on these days.
Right.
And my inner gremlin has a field day telling me that I will be lazy, never stop eating. The whole world will see what a giant failure I am.
Yeah,
so you see the progress feels shitty.
Well, absolutely. And it's not always going to, but it does. And that's a great example where support people and even therapists make a mistake. So you've worked your way to the place where you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're eating, you're resting, you're, all this stuff. If you come into the therapy session and you've worked your way to doing that, instead of saying good for you, what I'm going to say is, wow, that has got to be hard. Way to go. You realize what you're accomplishing here? That's what you need to be able to see. And that's what you need to know somebody else sees. Is like what you're doing. In order to do that, from what I know about you, that has to be excruciatingly painful, I may say. And so then you go, no crap, it is. Then you feel like somebody sees you. Because it's too easy. Or with me, somebody says, I haven't had a drink in a month. Go like, well, good for you.
No,
do you know how many I have not had in a month? I can tell you how many drinks I didn't take because this has been the focus of my life not to do this. So this is where we need people we don't have to educate. That's why we need other people in recovery from what we're in recovery from. And I know this about you, that you understand the power of support. You need to be able to say to somebody, this is what I've done all day long. They got to be able to go like, wow, what an accomplishment. How do you feel? And you feel horrible. And they go like, rather than go like, well, you should feel good. And go like, yeah, I guess you would, because this is very strenuous what you're doing. But especially when you add to the deal is when, the therapy or the recovery says you finish a day of doing that. And what does the recovery voice say? The recovery voice says, okay, do it again.
Yeah.
That's what I talk to people a lot about. It's like one thing to do something on one day. But I'll ask people, how many days in a row have you ever done this? And a lot of times it's interesting that people have had success, but they'll tell you, I've never done it 2 days straight. It's like, so that's where I'll start them. I'll say, let's do it 2 days in a row. And let's start there, because we need to respect that to do this stuff is, you are swimming through quicksand. It's hard.
And how do you help people do that? Like with you have great journaling
Oh, yeah, all
ideas.
kinds of things like that. Be sure they have a support system that they're calling on. It can be even something as simple as just a regular check-in. I'll say, like, why don't you do that after each meal? Why don't you shoot me an email, and I'll be collecting those until between now and the time we meet again. You can tell me how much you hate me. That's good. One of the things we're doing with this stuff is taking the anger that we've been pointing at ourselves and learning how to point it outward. Not in a way of blaming, but to stop beating ourselves up.
Yeah, rather beat up diet culture out there. Oh, God.
Yeah, or Ed. It's like,
Or
you know,
Ed.
yeah, it doesn't matter. It's like you can tell me how much you hate me for suggesting these things. I know that's fine. I'm not going to go anywhere because I understand that this is so difficult. And if you don't have somebody to scream at, then I'm certainly somebody you can do that with. It's like, and of course, that's a big risk to somebody. You know, what their inner bully will say is if you do yell at him, if you do tell him that you're angry, he's going to leave you.
Yes, exactly. He's not going to work with you anymore.
So think about just even that much is a gigantic step. It's like if I can get you just to tell me in a session how mad you are that you have to do this stuff and tell me what your eating disorder tells you about me. If you then take the risk of telling me how mad you are, you know, and even put that on me, and you're sitting there watching me say, good for you, great, I get it, and I don't go away, that's you know,
It
you look at that,
establishes
go like,
trust.
yeah, you go like, wow. And you don't trust it at first. When you leave that session, your bully's going to be saying, he'll call and cancel the next session. He's not going to put up with you anymore now that you've done that. And you're going to be saying back to him, he asked me to do it. You know, so there your recovery is now beginning to emerge. You go like, no, I actually did that because he suggested it. Yeah, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's going to fire you as a client. Like what you're doing is you're going like, calling the bluff. We'll see. We'll see. I'll go to the next session. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
You go to the next session. I say, hey, how you doing? What's been going on? And you realize nothing has changed. You know, you can actually express even anger, and you will not be abandoned.
And you have some incredibly awesome tips about journaling about this inner gremlin voice. So how does this work?
You don't put the bar very high there, Merritt. It's like, do you have any incredibly awesome tips?
I think they are.
I just like the idea that the interviewer says, can you tell us something brilliant and wonderful now? You go,
I know
that's
what you
like
mean.
somebody saying, be funny now.
I'm sorry. Yeah, true.
No,
okay, tell us about your sucky tips about journaling.
Awesome. We know each other, and you know some of what I have to say about this is, if this separation thing makes sense, what I do with clients at first is I say, we're going to practice separation. So basically I call it 2-column journaling. You write down, we're just going to take Ed, the eating disorder. Say, why don't you write a list of things that Ed says to you? Not a comprehensive list, because if you write everything down he says, you won't have time to do anything else. Just every day, a few things that Ed says to you. Now, here's the key. Ed does not get to use the I pronoun anymore. He has to call you by your name and talk to you in the second person. So rather than, you know, I need to do this, or I'm fat, or whatever the criticism is, it has to say, Merritt, you have to do this. Merritt, I don't like the way you look. What we're doing is we're going to take the I pronoun away from Ed. And it may seem like a simplistic thing, but it will change. When you actually practice this, it will change everything. So you make a list of what Ed is saying. And then you make a different column, and it is what your response is going to be. Now, what I want people to know when they're first starting with this is, because it's amazing how much pressure we'll put on ourselves in any situation, more than likely and actually predictably, what your response, if you're just beginning, your response to each one of those questions is going to be agreement. You know, Bob,
Like,
you're
Mary,
a horrible...
you look awful. Yes,
Yeah.
I know.
Yes, I know. That's
Okay.
right. Because people will jump ahead and they're trying to make their therapist feel good, and if you came back with a bunch of things where you disagreed, I would realize you're trying to please me. It's like, no, the thing is, separation happens when you realize that you're in agreement. See, a lot of times people mistakenly think that you're only separated when you disagree. It's like, no, you talked about darker before the dawn, the pain. It's like, this is actually one of the ways that it feels worse, not gets worse. Because now you're going to actually begin to experience yourself as basically the target for these messages. And it's going to say, Merritt, da, 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 and you're going to say, yes, I know. And I'm going to say, how does that feel? It feels horrible. And I think you're probably a good example of this. I might ask you, forget about everything we're talking about. Just tell me in life, do you like to be told what to do? How long did that take you to get to that answer? It's like, yeah, It was like even just those two syllables sounded defiant. Like, nope. So part of what I do with people is it doesn't fix everything, but you need to be able to see that you're somebody who doesn't like to be told what to do. This guy has been telling you what to do your entire life. And you've been saluting and saying, yes, sir, I'll do it. So this is where we're going to start moving from shame to anger, because basically if you don't like to be told what to do, you should be pretty upset with this guy because he controls you completely, or he has up to this point. And every time you say yes, and I agree. And again, good example of why it's going to get worse before it gets better, because just knowing that doesn't change your yes to a no. Now what's going to happen is you're going to feel yourself saying yes and actually feel what it feels like to be controlled by somebody else, and it's going to make you feel horrible.
Yeah, when we realize that diet culture has us in such a tight grip, we might get angry at it. Like, fuck, I've been letting this whole paradigm, make all the decisions for me in terms of exercise and food. Fuck that.
Yeah, and we've been turning it all on ourselves.
Yep.
It's like, and actually when we're on here, we call it putting the fuck you in the right place. It's like, wait a minute, that needs to go at my inner bully, my inner Ed, and to the rest of the world that's feeding all of that. It's like, ultimately it gets to the place we go, I'm actually not the problem. And then as we get to know the Ed voice, the bully voice and stuff like that, we're also going to install another voice. I've alluded to it a little bit, and I just tend to call it the recovery voice, because what we need is something else to focus on. Something else to listen to. If we're not going to listen to Ed, who are we listening to? And we need somebody on the inside of us that we can trust. And we generally, as we're beginning this process, don't feel that trustworthy ourselves, because who are you? Well, you're the one who's been conned by Ed all these years. So we need another voice. And by the way, this voice, very different from Ed or the bully, this voice really is a part of you. It's like, depending on the person, I may not even tell them that at first, because this is a voice of self-compassion and self-love and care and proactivity. That's the voice that says, my self-love very often is tough love, because people think a lot of times self-love seems sissy or namby-pamby. It's like, no, my tough love is usually, Tom, get up, you need to come with me. I don't want to go to school. Well, get up and come with me and tell me all about it on the way to school. Come on. We're going to go. You have to get this done.
And what about the exercise addict? Like, come on, get a move on. It's good for you. Like,
right. And so the recovery
voice would say, no, glue your ass to the sofa.
Right. The recovery voice is the one saying, here's the exercise I got for you today. There's a movie I want you to watch on television, and I want you to sit there through the entire thing. It would so much be easier to get up and run, 10 miles. It's like, yeah, we're not going to do that today. It's tough love, but it feels very different. This voice comes across as caring. It's like, no, I want to go exercise. No, it's not okay, Merritt. Not now, not today. You're not going to do that.
You get to rest.
That's right. Or in this case, the tough love voice says, you have to rest. Because what does a good parent do? A parent keeps the child safe and teaches the child how to take care of themselves and keep themselves safe.
That's why it is so important to stress again how much we need community support and therapy, because at first we will not be able to distinguish those two voices, the recovery voice and the fear voice, the inner gremlin, the bully.
Exactly.
That will only say, I will keep you safe. And the recovery voice will say, but no, resting will keep you safe. And the bully goes, move your ass, that'll keep you safe.
Yeah.
So it's really important for me also to just, as you said, keep checking back in with people, asking them, am I on the right track still? I feel awful. Is this okay? Is this supposed to be like this? Do you still love me if I look like this? Just out with it. I never talked about this whole stuff until I started my blog and my podcast. And now I see, the world is still turning, and I've not been killed. So assuming that by this I can help someone, it makes me feel better as well. But my inner gremlin voice told me all the time that I cannot talk about this. And now I can, and it's actually awesome.
I mean, what a great, gigantic, wonderful example. The gremlin tells you not to talk about it, not to tell anybody. So you find a way to tell the entire world. So I'm going to create a blog, and I'm going to create this podcast in which I'm going to basically make it available internationally. So, I mean, what better way to tell on that motherfucker? It's like, he goes, don't tell anybody. And go like, I tell you what, I've got a better idea, Merritt says. I'm going to tell everybody.
Yeah, I'm going to tell the universe.
That's right. And because when you say it, not only do you not have to feel ashamed, the responses you get from people is thank you for saying that. Yeah,
Interestingly enough, yeah.
Yeah, I did a presentation one time at Jack Daniels Corporation, of all things. It was kind of a supervisory thing that people had to come see me. It wasn't like they chose to come see me. So I was talking about all these multiple characters in our head, and a woman came up to me afterwards, and she just said, I just want to thank you for being so messed up.
Yeah, exactly.
And you knew immediately what that meant.
Yes, your mess is someone else's miracle.
She didn't feel alone anymore. Yes, that's right.
Exactly.
And all I told her was how crazy I was.
Yeah, and sometimes it just helps to put it on a really big scale, because if I only ask someone, then my inner bully or inner gremlin is still very strong, and he can say, well, this other person, if you want to believe them that you're okay, go ahead. And it gets cynical again. And if I tell the whole world and I get multiple responses and people feel helped by it, I mean, that puts the bully in the corner. Because
you're basically your gremlin's worst nightmare now. Your gremlin probably needs therapy.
Yeah, but he's still fucking persistent.
Oh, yeah. And I'm glad you said it that way, because this is really important for people to get. The reason we go into relationship rather than possession is because your gremlin does not have to change at all. As a matter of fact, we don't expect he will change. The only thing he's going to do is get better at what he does. It's like people often think recovery is when you don't hear the voice anymore.
And feel good all the time. Yoo-hoo.
Right. And certainly in recovery over time, you hear the voice less. But more than that, what's happening is not only he's not driving the bus, he's at the very back of the bus screaming things at you, you know. Don't forget you're really a fake skinny person and you're ultimately a fat pig, and you're driving the bus going like, thank you for sharing there, Ed. For a moment there, I almost forgot. You know, it's like they lose their power. We just look at them and roll our eyes and say, okay, whatever.
That's awesome. This bus analogy, I love this. And I love it because it's also good within this whole podcast blogging thing, because it suggests that the bus is not otherwise empty. And I'm, Ed or the inner gremlin is at the back of the bus. He's yelling awfully loud, but there's other people on the bus and I'm driving the bus. So the chances are that I will keep driving and he will keep screaming, but I will not waver.
Right, and to get the most out of that metaphor of the bus too, Merritt, it's like, this is what people don't get. Ultimately we want Eddie at the back of the bus, but even if he's moved all the way up and you're driving the bus and I'm Ed and I'm right there talking in your ear and I'm screaming at you at the top of my lungs, as long as you're driving the bus. Now, you're having a bad day because I'm screaming at you. Doesn't feel good. But as long as you're driving the bus, you're still in recovery. What I want people to know, and it goes back, and you actually said it, which is there are a lot of times in recovery when you're doing good, you're feeling like shit. And it's like it will not always stay that way. You know that because you understand it begins to change and you begin to feel better and better, and it gets better all the time. But it's like it doesn't come instantly. Part of the risk we're talking about is you have to be willing to stay in that dark place for a while.
It's really awesome what she's saying. And I think at this point, it's important to let us all know who you're working with, how people can find you, because I think this is the best ad of you could ever have brought across. So please let us know how people can find you and how they can work with you. Well,
first of all, Merritt, I've done a lot of interviews through the years. It's like you're the best. You're the best kind of interviewer. It's like I lost touch with the fact that we're recording anything, and I realized I'm just in a conversation with you, and you're not just asking the questions. You're challenging me. You're asking stuff. You tell me, that doesn't make so much sense. Tell me more about that. And just as often as I've said something that makes a point that people need to hear, you have too. It's a beautiful example of it comes out of the collaboration. and you're a great collaborator, and that makes a great interviewer, by the way.
That's nice compliment. Thank you.
Absolutely. As far as me, it's my website. We'll start there. Is thomrutledge.com, and my first name is spelled with an H. It's THOMRUTLEDGE.com. You'll find lots of things on the website. All of my books are there. And you also always want people to know that if you go to my website, I love giving free samples of things. So it's like if you go there, there's some specific eating disorder articles. There's some specific addiction articles. But all of the articles, even the general ones, are really applicable to all of the stuff we're talking about. But there's quite a few of those. And so anybody is free to just to go download those things, share them with whomever they would like to. I want them to buy my books, of course, but even if you don't do that, I want to give you something that's going to be useful. The other thing that you can do on Facebook, I have a new page for my newest book, which is called Greater Possibilities. And if you'll just go search that on Facebook, my name and the Greater Possibilities, please join me on that page. And I tend to publish some articles, and pretty soon I'm going to put something up there about to get to fear to love we have to risk, which is one that you've inspired. So I appreciate that. So
I will link to your books. I will link to the page on Facebook and to your website as well, of course.
Yeah,
it's all going to be in the show notes of this episode. And I have a last question for you, and that is, what would you like to be remembered for?
That's something I think about a lot. It's like if you show up at my funeral, what's the most important thing? Ultimately, the thing I want to hear is he was a good man. He was, he did good while he was here. And that's not just because of the work I do. It may be the person I let go ahead of me in line or the turtle I picked up out of the road. It's like that's what's most important.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
For me, it was a great discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.